The Holy Gospel this morning comes from St. Luke in the 17th chapter. Now, on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered the village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they cried out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" So then he said to him, "Get up, go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. For anyone who has raised a child, or in my case nowadays raising a grandchild, it is pretty obvious that manners are not an innate human quality. They are indeed learned over and 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 over again. Saying please, saying thank you, constantly has to be part and parcel of a parent's life, grandparent's life in my case. Because we just don't know this. We don't come out of the womb saying these words. In fact, my oldest daughter has often said she was a week late from her due date, and she still resents the fact that she had to leave the womb. She's 29. So everybody says, thank you, please. You got to learn that stuff, right? You got to learn it. I mean, right? What do you say? You get a little kid, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and they get something, you say, what do you say? And they say, thank you. Or they say, I want your phone. And you say, well, no, you got to say please. And then, please, I want your phone, and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, why do I have to say please all the time? We got to teach ourselves that. That's not something that we know instinctively, like breathing, right? Or the need to eat or drink or any of those kind of human qualities that are innate to our existence. We have to learn how to say please and thank you, because that's what it means to live together. That's what it means to be a culture, a community, a family, an organization, to learn those kind of manners. You don't have to learn how to breathe to be human. You just do it. But you have to learn how to say thank you and please if you want to enter into human society. So these are learned behaviors, and of course, if they are learned, they can be absolutely wonderful and completely charming. I mean, I got 100 stories, but yesterday, for example, my daughter and her husband were working, and Chris was working, which meant that Asher, my grandson, he was left to me. Now, in general, our family tries to avoid leaving the grandson with just me. That is not a good recipe for anything, as my daughter can rightly attest. It would have been a lot better if her mom had been more part of her upbringing, I'm sure. So Chris did her best to work as quickly as possible so that Asher could spend the least amount of time with me, which would probably then lessen the damage, certainly long term. But nonetheless, there it was. So he and I are bombing around in the truck, and he loves riding around in my truck because when he's in his car seat, then he can see, so he's driving down towards Fort Calhoun on 75, and he goes, "Oh, look, a lake." I said, "No, that's Fort Calhoun, but okay, whatever." And so we go to this one bakery, and we're in this bakery, and I'm getting some bread and stuff, and he's standing there, and there's just him and I and the clerk behind the counter, and she says, "Oh, your son." I said, "Your grandson, thank you, though. You're my grandson." "Oh, he's so cute." I said, "Yeah, well, whatever." And so she says to him, she goes, "Would you like a piece of bread?" They give samples of bread, And he goes, "Well, yes, please." And I said, and I'm getting this sample of bread then that she gives me, and I said, "Do you want butter and honey on that?" And he goes, "Yes." And he takes this piece of bread, and he eats it, and he looks up at this woman at the counter, and she goes, "Thank you. This is delicious." A 4-year-old saying that, she's like, "Oh my gosh," and stuff like that. And with men, we're just radically embarrassed, but I know with women, the ovaries kick in and something else happens. But I mean, it's just like, I was like, oh, he's so charming. I imagine I was going to lose him somewhere along the line. But, that happens, right? When the manners actually kick in, it's just like a magical moment, And this woman all of a sudden, had the best day because Asher told her that her bread was delicious. And even if, truth be told, I think he was just licking the honey, but I didn't want to tell her that. So Jesus is walking to his death, and never forget that. By the way, when you're in this part of the Gospel of Luke, and as we start now approaching, not only as we celebrate Christmas, but then as we work through Lent and towards Easter, that when we're in this part of the Gospel, Jesus is on his way to die, and he knows it. He knows he's going to die. So everything that he's doing now has with it sort of a poignancy to it, sort of an understanding that this could be the last time for this, okay? Because he's not going to have too many more of these experiences. So he's at the point of always feeling like, well, this could be the last time where I can teach them this, or I can say this, or I can perform this way. So they're always within these stories towards the end of the Gospels, not only with Luke, but with all of them. Never forget that overarching sense of doom that Jesus is going to die lays over the top of all of these stories. And because in this particular story, Jesus is heading down to Jerusalem, and he happens to be traveling through the borderlands between Samaria and Judea, and he just passes through a village, and Luke is so tired now of telling us about all the villages that it's just a village. And this particular one has 10 lepers, all right? Now, the way in which, they didn't have medicine back in those days, right? There were no hospitals. There were no places where you could go and get, bandages or, antibiotics. They didn't exist, obviously. And so what happened is you tended to have people who had diseases tended to be put on the outer edges of the towns and villages so that their diseases, especially those that were known to be communicable, like leprosy, were kind of kept at bay from the rest of the community. And it didn't mean that they were good, bad, or indifferent. It was just more like a public health thing. And of course, if you had a disease like leprosy, you tended to hang around with people who had that disease so that you couldn't cross-contaminate. So, there were always various groups of people who had various kinds of injuries or diseases. And so the way in which the Jewish community had done this, and this was true pretty much up until penicillin by Salk, right? Basically, 100 years ago. That basically what we did, we tended to keep these people kind of segregated from us. And the Jewish tradition, though, also understood that you could sometimes be cured of a disease. I mean, leprosy, the symptoms from leprosy, it's a nerve disease that eats away at your skin. They can go away. They just go away. Nobody knows why. And then what do you do if you're standing there with all your other, 10 leper friends, there's 10 of you standing there, and then one of you looks down and says you're healed. Then what do you do? And the way that the Jewish tradition had worked this out was that you went to the priest or the leader of the synagogue, leader of the community, and you showed him that you were clear. You didn't have any more leprous lesions or any of that kind of stuff. And then they said a prayer, gave thanks to God, and then they sent you back into the community. It's just kind of like you got a clean bill of health, like having a note from the doctor, right? So that what happens is that if something like that happened, and of course it doesn't, not every disease works its own mysterious way through our individual bodies, but if it were to happen, that was the basic plan. And so what Jesus does then is he's walking through this town, these 10 lepers they ask him for mercy. They don't necessarily ask for healing per se, they just want to see some mercy. They got this disease that keeps them ostracized from the rest of their community. It's a painful disease, as you can imagine. There's not a lot of relief, obviously, for it in those days. And so they're asking for some mercy. And so Jesus then Jesus just cuts the middleman out. He just says, go show yourselves to the priest, which they're going to have to do anyhow if the rest of the community is ever going to accept them. So Jesus is just like, don't bother coming to me. Just go straight to the priest, have the priest sign off on it, and you'll be good to go. You can go back to work on Monday. Okay? That kind of a thing. All right? You'll be all set. So they're walking out to the priest. And as they're walking to the priest, that's when the healing actually occurs. And they get cured of their disease. The leprosy goes away. And one of the guys is like, whoa, yeah. And so he remembers He remembers what his grandmother taught him. Now, I'm sure the other 9, their grandmothers and their parents all drilled it into them. Say thank you, say please, just like we all had to do, for those of us who did that. But the Samaritan guy actually remembered. And he was like, oh, Grandma always said when something nice happens, you should thank the person. So he goes running back to Jesus because he's like, well, this happened. It happened because of Jesus. And he says, thank you. Thank you. And Jesus is like, this is the story of my life. Turns to the disciples who are with him, presumably, and he says, I cured 10. One guy comes back to say thank you. One guy, and he's not even a Jew. Who had the over-under on 1? You know, I mean, you know, what Luke is telling us here is that this graciousness that God shows us, all right? What this love that God shows us is available for all of us, Jewish or not, Samaritan, Jewish, doesn't matter. And that all of us are healed by God. And that what happens then is that depending on how well we remember how we were trained, we either say thank you or not. And if we remember it, good for us. If not, well, sometimes it happens. Because, I mean, let's be honest. We all want to say thank you a lot, but do we really? I mean, if you think about it, we probably should be saying thank you from the first breath we take to the last breath we take. And there's not a lot of room for the rest of the words in the English language other than thank and you. I mean, everything, breath, air, life, food, friends, family, whatever, you should be saying thank you for. But, man, life is busy. I mean, those of you who have been in a relationship for anything more than 20 minutes, I mean, you know how important it is to be in that relationship. Chris and I have been married for going on 35 years now. I know I couldn't be here without her. I mean, she's lucky if I remember her birthday, you know, much less say thank you the other 364 days. That's how it is. I'm not proud of it. Not something I want to teach our kids. That's life. I try to say thank you when I can, when I remember. But we get busy. It just slips our minds instead of off our tongues. And then, of course, what about all the folks that don't get healed? How do you say thank you for that? You know, presumably in this town, there were more than just 10 lepers who could have used some healing. What about all those who were sitting there who had no limbs or were blind or were deaf, through no fault of their own either? And as they heard or saw or watched the lepers run back healed, there they sit in their disability and despair. I mean, it's hard to say thank you times like that. It's hard to say thank you when your best friend of 50 years calls up and says, the cancer's back and there's nothing you can do to stop it this time. It's hard to say thank you. It's hard to say thank you when your own child no longer calls or lets you know that they care about you or that you're even alive. It's hard to say thank you then. It's hard to say thank you when it seems like everything else has been going wrong and it's just one more thing and you go to start the car and then the battery's dead and you just hit your limit and you're banging your head on the steering wheel wishing that it was any other day but Monday. It's a tough time to say thank you. So to come here and have Jesus say, hey, you know, you should be saying thank you all the time, you're like, well, maybe for you. You're God. But for the rest of us, we got to work at it. And so we do. But remember this, as you're trying to frantically remember to say thank you and please, at least for the next 18 hours or so, until you go to bed. that although you might forget to say thank you, God does not. These waters of baptism in which have bathed all of us in God's mercy are God's continual gratefulness for you. God is so grateful that you're here. God is so grateful for the relationships that you've nurtured and developed with all of God's people. God is so grateful for the land that you have taken care of, for the animals that you have caretaken and stewarded. God is so grateful for you. And God never forgets to say thank you. The bread and the wine, the remembrance of the baptism, the mutual conversation and consolation of the brothers and sisters in Christ are constantly God's way of saying thank you for being here. Thank you for offering whatever you can, perhaps not in as strong or healthy of a state as previously, or maybe not compared to other people with all your limbs or whatever it might be, but thank you for being the friend who can be on the receiving end of a phone call that the cancer is back. Thank you for being a parent who can be there for a child whose prodigalness does not allow them to say, I love you. Thank you for being here. And it is God's constant thank you that graces us every day. It is God's constant love for you and for what you offer to the world that makes God smile. You don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be a Samaritan. You just have to be loved by God. And these waters are a constant reminder that you are. And in being loved by God, God says thank you. And sometimes, when we get it right, well, this would be delicious.